Hi, welcome back to my channel, Manga Hoarder. My name is Laura, and today I am doing my February wrap-up for my 1001 Comics project. This is my project to read and buy and collect all of the manga that are mentioned in the 1001 Comics You Must Read Before You Die book that's edited by Paul Gravett. There's about 150 titles in that book that I am able to, or have been released in English. Oh wait, that's not right. There's 150 titles of manga in that book, and probably like 100 or a little more than that have been released in English. I think that's what it is. So, you know, I have a bit still to collect, and I'm working on it. So first off, I'm just going to show you what I've collected in the last month. And you have seen all of these titles before, so I'm not going to go into depth, but certainly if you're interested in more about them, I will have the haul video linked up here. So the first title is Ode to Kirihito. This is by Osamu Tezuka. It's a big omnibus. I have a selection of short stories. This is called Secret Comics Japan, edited with notes by Chikao Shiratori, but it's a collection of various different authors. The one that I want to read is Usamara Furia's Polepoli, which is, I think, the cover image. A small hardcover, which is kind of unusual, Town of Evening Calm, Country of Cherry Blossoms by Fumio Kono. I was gifted this series, but it's complete. Domu, A Child's Dream by Katsuhiro Otomo. This was from Samuel Trejo, who I am very grateful sent this along. Two bilingual manga. So the first one is The Wonderful World of Sazai-san, and this is by Hasegawa, I think. I can't remember her name, so just give me a second. Michiko Hasegawa. And it is a bilingual manga. It's sort of kind of a yonkoma for comedy panel manga format, and it's bilingual. And then the other one that I got is the first volume of The Genius Vagabond by Fujio Akatsuka, and this one also is bilingual, but in this case the Japanese is in the gutter here and the English are in the bubbles, so just sort of a different look. These are good titles if you are learning the language, either Japanese or English. So that's what I have gotten for this project in the last month. So I will be adding all of those titles to my TBR jar for next month, because I have already drawn my March titles, so these will all go in for possibility of being read in April and going forward. And then the next things that I'm going to show you are all the titles that I was supposed to read in February and didn't. So I didn't have very much luck reading my TBR this month. I did read, I participated in She Geeks Out Manga Love Readathon, where I read quite a lot, and then I kind of was just slumpy after that. And I don't think it was because of the readathon, but I certainly wasn't reading a lot. I had other projects going on that I needed to kind of pay attention to. I was reading other things, just not as much manga, and certainly not from my TBR. So basically the things that I had picked out for this month were Lupin the Third by Monkey Punch. I don't think anyone thought I was going to read this, and I certainly didn't. And then I didn't read it, so I definitely fulfilled my goal of not reading Monkey Punch or Lupin the Third. I also did not read No.2 by Shigeru Mizuki, which I'm kind of surprised about because it did make it all the way into my room, where I normally read manga, made it onto my nightstand. I just didn't end up reading it. I have read it before, so I don't feel like I've really failed in that respect, but I certainly would like to reread it, and it's certainly worth rereading, so any of these titles that I haven't read, I will definitely go back in the jar, but I was just kind of surprised not to have read it. The other one that I'm surprised I didn't read was Old Boy by Garon Tsuchiya. Now, I was in the mood to read this in January. It was a title that I was sort of considering, but because it was in the jar, I was like, well, I'll wait until I pull the title, rather than read it when I'm in the mood for it, which is what I should have done. I really, really like this title a lot. It's a great title. I highly recommend it. Great psychological thriller. But I didn't read it in the month, so it'll be going back in the jar. Because, you know, I'd be happy to reread it, I just didn't. And then the other one that I kind of avoided was Eagle, and this one is by Kaiji Kawaguchi, just because this one's a little bit more political and it feels like it's going to be a little more dense. I didn't end up getting to it, and again, this one made it into my room. I really didn't think that I was going to be in the mood for it, but when I was flipping through it, I realized that, you know, the panels are pretty large. I imagine that this story will actually go fairly quickly. I'm just not really into kind of political drama. I will, of course, have to read it for this project, so it's going back in the jar as well. Everything's going in the jar. I'm going to read everything, it just not always in the mood. So I am going to put those titles back in the jar, and I do have sort of the yellow slips still, so they will just get refolded and put back in there. But I did end up reading 2 titles, and the first one that I read was Blue by Kiriko Nananan. You remember now that when I was doing this, I was going to find out what the part that Frederick Baudelaire has in this, because it says graphic adaptation by. I think someone had commented that he was heavily involved in sort of the translation and rearranging of the panels when it was translated to French, possibly. I'm not entirely sure, and I didn't look it up, so maybe that's a project to do in the future. I don't have time to do that right now. So whatever his involvement was, I really liked this comic. It is more of a graphic novel. It doesn't feel like it's serialized at all. It's just sort of a one-shot title. It is sort of the relationship between two teenage schoolgirls, and I had thought more that it was going to be more of a romance and about a girl who was obsessed with the other girl. Kind of is, but I think that it's more just the experience of how you feel about your female friends when you're at high school. At least that is how I interpreted it, because it felt very nostalgic to me. I certainly have had a lot of the emotions that I felt were displayed, or at least I connected to them on a personal level, and I was not romantically in love with any of my high school friends, so that's how I'm going to interpret it. But there was just something kind of you're sort of in this like strange struggle between, you know, being friends with your friends but also being like overly obsessed with your friends, and where that line is kind of drawn, and that's just sort of where it kind of fit with me, because I had a lot of these emotions. It sort of is a story about one girl's obsession with another girl, and then they get into a relationship that does involve, at very least, a lot of kissing. The one girl is sort of obsessed with her friend, and the other girl is just sort of open to experiences. You know, she likes boys and possibly also girls. It's not really clear in this, in my opinion, but they have this really strong, close bond when they're in school. And then, of course, you know, as time progresses and you get to the end of your high school career, you realize that you have to split with your friends and that they have different plans, and you're not necessarily going to be with them anymore. And so there is sort of like this lingering knowledge that the split is about to happen. So it's quiet, it's short, there isn't a lot going on, but it definitely is very emotional and emotionally driven. And the art in it is really, really wonderful. I wasn't entirely into it on the first page, but by the time I got to, you know, page 10, I really loved it. There's a lot of stark black and whites. The line drawing in it, like, there isn't a lot of varied weights in the drawing. It's kind of simple drawings, you know, like, they're just simple line drawings, black, white, and kind of a tonal gray. And the one thing that I thought was just really wonderful is just how much white space there is in this. It really is the place that the emotions are captured, and it is also the place where the one girl's inner monologue is captured. And so she, you know, lives her life, and then she has, you know, these deep emotions and deep conversations about life and her, you know, nostalgic experience. So there's this thing going on. The white spaces are so significant in this book. I really liked it. I really am looking forward to reading it again. I certainly recommend it. It definitely has a sense of at least my high school experience, if not your high school experience, there is something definitely raw and true, I think, in this title, and I really, really enjoyed it. So yeah, I definitely would recommend it. So this is a title by an author who does write for, or has written for, Garo magazine, which is an alternative title, or alternative magazine. So her work does sort of reflect that. It's not kind of your standard manga. She also is involved in, this is a title that's part of a greater kind of movement in manga, the nouvelle manga movement, that involves French, Belgian, and Japanese creators sort of in a collaboration of sort of exchanging of ideas, and so this also sort of part of that small subset of manga. So it is sort of has other things going on with it as well. It's really interesting. It's really well written. I think it's worth your time to read if you have a chance to pick it up. The next title that I ended up reading, and the only other title I read, is Planetesse. So I did finally read this. I read Volume 1 and Volume 2. This is by Makoto Yukimura, who's the same author as Vinland Saga. So a MangaTube favorite. This was not my favorite. I thought it was very good. I think I rated it 4 stars or around 4 stars. But there was just some things about it that I didn't really love. It is basically the story of a crew of garbage collectors who are astronauts who are working in space cleaning up space junk. So anytime that there is a conflict, anytime there's a spaceship, anytime any sort of human activity occurs in space, junk is left behind. And these people are out sort of all through space cleaning up this junk, and it is a very significant job because even a fraction of a piece of garbage that is left in space will gain so much speed and traction that if you are traveling in space and you're hit by this junk, that basically, you know, everybody on board could be killed from a little fraction of junk. So that's basically what this story is. It's about this group of characters who are in space doing this job. Now, you know, like garbage men or garbage people tend to be considered even now, like this is not the high job that everybody kind of desires. It is still garbage collecting sort of in a way, and so some of the characters are sort of having an existential crisis about what does it mean to have this job, and do I want to be here, and why am I an astronaut but not like a great astronaut who's going exploring space, instead I'm cleaning up junk. Some of the characters who are having sort of existential crises about what does it mean to be in space, and you know, what is space, and do I belong here, do we belong here, what does that all mean? So everybody's going through some sort of big sort of high questioning about their own existence, and it's very interesting. Like, I think the stories are good, and I think that the questions are valid, and there is some interesting discussion about what space is, but because this is a story about people who are in space, a lot of the realizations that they have are not true, because people don't, like, apart from astronauts who are on spaceships or on, you know, like spaceports or whatever they live in, people aren't living in space, and so this is sort of predetermining how we would experience space and live in space, and I'm not entirely sure I'm convinced that this is how we would experience it. And so I was sort of had a little disconnect there. I also had disconnect with a lot of the art. Now I know that Yukimura is a favorite, often claimed a favorite artist, and there are some really nice pictures, but I think that he definitely misses out in capturing the grandness of space. This is not Leiji Matsumoto, who just knows how to capture the like vastness of space in 2 little panels. There's too much going on, there's too much filled in here, so you never really get the sense, like, you never get that sense that you are so small and so insignificant compared to space, which I think is just truly missing, because as an existential sort of discussion about space, like, that's what you should be looking at. That's what you should be feeling about it. So I felt like that was missing. And then there's a couple of instances where there was just illustrations that were completely off, particularly, and I shared this in a Twitter group, so if I find the picture I'll put it up, but and there's an illustration of one of the characters as a baby, but really just looks like a little man. It's so off-putting. You know, you can see the gaps in an illustrator. You can see the gaps in an illustrator's repertoire, and sometimes they just stick out like a sore thumb and things like that. You know, he really needed to study babies and how they look, and then apply that to his art style. Because it was really just like threw me right out of the story. There was a whole chapter where this baby is, and that was no baby. So there was just some issues that I had. So I thought it was a good story, but I just felt like there was more that needed to be had, and it could be a lot of, I think, my experience could have to do with just my mood at the time. It just wasn't, I wasn't quite as connected to this as I was Blue. But I am really glad I read it. I'm not a big science fiction reader. I don't generally like things set in space, so for something that I normally don't like, I think this was a very good title. But yeah, it's not something I necessarily think I would pick up very often. I definitely will reread it, but this one is definitely calling me a lot more than this one is. So that's it. I read 2 out of 6 titles. Not very good, but I am hopeful about March. You know, I do already have a list going, and I'm going to put everything that I didn't read and everything that I bought into my TBR jar for April picks, and maybe I'll get to read some of these things then. So anyway, if you have read any of these titles, I'd love to know what your thoughts are down below. And thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.